Well, we are tackling 1 Samuel 8, 9, and 10 today. We found here in chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we see that Samuel has obviously gotten older, like the most of us usually do each day. And he's asked his sons to begin to serve as judges over Israel. Obviously, a lot has taken place since the last time we caught up with Samuel as a young boy wearing his mom's little e-pod that he would make for him each year. She would go up. And now he is obviously married and has kids. We see that it says Samuel's sons. The difficult thing is Samuel's sons began to take after Eli's sons. They were not men who were devout to the ministry. They were men who were sought to make a gain out of the ministry. They allowed bribing to happen, and in their judging of issues, they allowed that money to persuade them in how they were done, so they were unjust in how they were judging. We find in verse 4, it says, the elders. Now, we need to make a clarification. This is not elders as we see in the New Testament sometimes. That could be translated as a episkopos, a bishop, or as we understand, a ministerial leader or pastor. Here in the Hebrew, it really means an older guy. So some of the older guys came and approached Samuel and says, hey, your boys are messing around. They wanted a king to lead them. They kind of saw what their fortune or their future may look like with, if he was passed down from him to his sons. And they said, we want a king like everyone else. Now let's pause for a second. I want to speak to all the parents. If your kids come to you and they ask for something and they immediately follow up with, well, because my friend has one, I heard the chuckles. That's not good enough. Like, I need a real reason. Well, I want one. Why do you want one? Why do you need it? Because so-and-so and so-and-so, they have one, and I'm left out, so I want one too. That's kind of how Israel responded. It's like, we want a king like all the other nations. You got God. We know. We want a guy. But you have God. But we want a guy. And so this kind of went on for a little bit. And so God tells Samuel in verses 8 and 9, it's all I've done for them, and they still serve other gods. He says, make sure you listen to them only and give them a king that will rule over them. Verses 10 through 18. So Samuel tells them, if you guys get a king, he's going to take your sons. He's going to appoint them to be over his chariots, his horsemen, his commanders. He's going to take your people to plow his grounds, harvest his crops, make weapons for his wars. He'll take your daughters and make them into cooks, bakers, and task them with making oils and perfumes. He will take the best of the fields, best of the vineyards, best of the orchards, and he'll give a tenth of it back to his servants, which, oh, by the way, that's what you guys are going to become, his servants. And he's going to put your sons to work for themselves. All these things are going to come to you if you guys want a king. This is what it's going to look like. This is the problem you're going to have. And this is how they responded. No, we won't. No. You ever try to explain something? Listen, if we do this, then here's what's going to happen. Nuh-uh. And you've been there, you're like, yes, it is. What's going to happen is if you do this, then it's just going to start this chain. No, listen, everyone who does, I'm different. I'm built different. That's the new one that we hear now. I'm built different. No, you were built like me, and I did the same things you did. No. Israel's like, we want a king. We want a God to tell us what this stuff. You've got God to tell you, we want all this stuff. Well, if you do that, then here's what's going to happen, and you guys are going to regret this later on. No, we won't. No, we won't. This is what we want. I want it. Verses chapter 9, 1 through 5 starts out, says, so a man from the tribe of Benjamin, whose son's name was Saul, he was a very tall man. Saul's dad, Kish, had some donkeys, and they got lost. So Saul and another person went looking for these donkeys, and they traveled through several places. And eventually, Saul said, hey, let's call the search off by now. My dad's probably more concerned about us than these little donkeys. Let's just go back home. Verse 6 through 10, we see that this other guy, the servant that was with Saul, said, well, let's go see a prophet, or a seer, as they called him at that time. Let's go to a seer. Maybe he can help us up and find these donkeys. And Saul's like, but we don't have anything to offer him in exchange for his help. And he's like, I've got a quarter of a shekel. And he's like, let's do it. So they take off and they go to find this seer. Verses 11 through 14, when they arrived near this place where the seer was located, they asked, is he here today? And they said, yes, he is. He's actually up on the hilltop getting ready to perform a sacrifice. After that, he's going to bring the sacrifice down. He's going to bless it. We're going to eat, and we're hungry. So if you need to do this, you better hurry up and meet with him. Paul paraphrased. Verses 15 through 20, God had already spoke to Samuel about Saul. He just didn't know it was Saul. He told them that this time tomorrow, a man from the tribe of Benjamin will come here. He tells him that you're to anoint him and gives him some instruction. I just want to pause for a second and see all that's happening from both sides here. We got Saul going looking for donkeys, okay? We got Samuel, he's spending time with the Lord, and he says, a guy from Benjamin, I know that Israel wants a king, you're going to give him, it's going to be from the tribe of Benjamin, and this guy tomorrow is going to be here, and you are going to anoint him as king. Saul just thinks he's looking for donkeys. Samuel's out looking for the next king. Meanwhile, God is working two different stories in to come together. You ever look back on something that was maybe a tragedy when you were maybe 5 years old or 10 or maybe 20, just 15, 10, maybe even 30 years in the past? It was absolutely a tragedy. And now that you're 30 years removed from that and you see how God has intersected all those things that was a result of that thing, you're like, God was working this plan out the entire time. You didn't see it in the moment, because in the moment you were looking for donkeys and someone else was looking for the next king of Israel. And then all of a sudden you look back and say, man, God orchestrated all these things. Could you imagine Kish, Saul's dad? He walks, where'd the donkeys go? The stupid donkeys. And he's all fired up. And Saul, go find those stupid donkeys, And he's so mad the donkeys are gone, not realizing he's just sent his son on a mission to become the next king of Israel. Church, I just want to encourage you something. And sometimes you are frustrated because you're on a donkey-looking mission, and God has something else in store with you in the process. I know it's frustrating looking for donkeys, but don't forget that God is working in all things. Okay, let's move on. So when Saul met Samuel, he asked to see the seer. Samuel says, I'm that guy. I'm the guy you're looking for. He says, now I want you to come with me to the high place. Come on with me, and you're going to eat. And in the morning, I'll tell you all that you're needing to know. And don't worry, your donkeys have been found. What? I'm going to tell you, that's what I need to know. I'm going to tell you all that you really need to know. Don't worry, your donkeys have been found. Verses 21 picks up, it says, so Saul asked, who has looked favorably upon in your area? Is it who's not in your house? Or Samuel asked that. So Saul replies, not me. Samuel's like, who's really looked upon and favorably in your house? Who's like the guy? Saul's like, well, it's certainly not me. I'm from the tribe of Benjamin. We're the most humble group of all. He's like, why are you asking me all these things? Then Samuel took him aside and gave him a seat at the head of the table in front of 30 men. Samuel gives him food set aside for him to eat that was reserved for the special guests. So again, Saul's out looking for donkeys. He runs across the seer to help him find the donkeys. Samuel says, hey, come with me to this feast. I'm going to set you at the head of the table and give you the food that was reserved for the special guest sitting at the head of the table. Now, for me, if I'm invited somewhere and I sit at the head of the table, the first thing that goes through my head is, do I have to pay for this? I don't know if Saul was asking himself that question or not, but he's sitting at the head of the table, and then after the meal, he gives him the penthouse suite. He says, I'm going to make a bed for you on the roof. So then in verse 26, the next morning, Saul gets up and Samuel told him, when you leave, tell your servant to go ahead of you. He doesn't need to travel with you. Tell him to go ahead, but I want to stop here because I want to make God's word known to you. Just as Eli helped hear God's voice for Samuel. Samuel's now passing this on to Saul. Samuel took a flask of oil, poured it over his head, kissed him, and said, the Lord has now made you prince over Israel, and you shall save them from their surrounding enemies. Here's a sign confirming what the Lord has done here. And he gives them some instructions. It says, as you leave here, you're going to encounter two men, and they will tell you that your donkeys that you're looking for are found, and your father is now anxious about you. After you meet with them, you'll find three men. One has goats, one has bread, one has wine. After that, you'll meet several people, several prophets playing music and prophesying. Then the Spirit of the Lord is going to rush upon you, and you'll prophesy with them, and you will become a different person. Verses 7 through 16. Now, this is taking place. He says, after all this is taking place, do as your hand finds it. It means you need to be led by the Spirit. God is directing you now. Follow what the Spirit is leading you to do. And Saul left, all the things that he said that happened did. When others saw Saul prophesy, they were amazed and they were wondered, what has happened to the son of Kish? Saul's uncle asked, where did you go? That's where we got the title of today's message. Basically, Saul replied, I went looking for donkeys and I found a crown. And no, he really didn't say that, but that's reality. That's what happened. Verses 17 through 24, Samuel calls everyone together. He tells them, listen up, people. God has delivered you from Egypt. God has delivered you from other kingdoms that were oppressing you, and you've continued to reject your God. The God that has saved you from all your distresses, all your calamities, and now you want a man to rule over you, not a holy God. So, I present to you your king of Israel, Saul. It says, as they looked for Saul, he was hiding in the baggage. So, look at that in chapter 10, verse 7 through 24. Let me find the specific case because it's pretty hilarious. I think it starts in 21. It says, and Saul, the son of Kish, was taken by Lot, and when they sought him, he could not be found, verse 22, so they inquired him again of the Lord, is there a man still to come? And the Lord said, behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage. So they're presenting Saul as the next king, and Saul is hiding in the baggage. Now, I know you guys have known me long enough to know I've got a weird sense of humor. When I'm reading this is what I thought, this is what I saw in my head. E.T. hanging out with all the like no one can see me kind of thing. I was later told by a sweet girl in our church that E.T. looks like a wet cardboard box. But that's a pretty good, accurate description. You can take it off the screen now. But so Saul's being presented as the next king, and he's hiding. Remember, he's a tall guy. He's hiding amongst the baggage. And so they're like, where's Saul? Has anyone seen Saul? And he's just like hiding in the baggage. And then he comes out. And they say, long live the king. They're so excited. We have a king. It's Saul. God has given us what we wanted. Thank you, Samuel. We now have a king. Long live the king. There's this big celebration. People brought presents and gifts. Verse 25 through 27, Samuel recorded all the duties of what the king should do for the people. And Saul went home with people whose hearts were touched to serve him and walk side by side with him. But there were some, as the text says, worthless men or worthless fellows who did not get on board. They despised Saul and they brought nothing to honor him. But Saul remained peaceful. So where does this take us? We're not looking for a king today. Although our hearts sometimes tend to run to man for more answers than God. And all the time, sometimes we're not necessarily calling out for a king. We certainly have put man above God many times in our life. So if you have your bullets on the back, you're taking notes. First thing is this: be careful what you ask for. Be careful what you ask for. In chapter 8, verses 19 through 22, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we shall also be like all the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel heard all the words of the people repeated in the ears of the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel said to them, okay, Israel, go back to your cities. You want it? You can have it. Be careful what you ask for. With Israel, God knew what was best for his people. But his people didn't believe that what God had for them was best. I know there's many times in our life where there's an authority over us, whether it be our boss or employer, or maybe in a family situation, a parent, husband and wife relationship, and there's a struggle, and we don't believe that the answer was given to us is in our best interest. We don't like it. So God says, okay. I'm best for you, but if you don't think what I have for you is best, then you can have something else. Isn't it funny how we know more than God does? I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who argues with him in prayer, but I find myself sometimes in debate with God as if he doesn't quite understand where I'm coming from. And then I remind myself of what God knows and who he is, and I'm like, I'm really an idiot. God knows exactly my frustration. God absolutely knows my insecurities. God understands where I'm coming from. Why would I waste all this time arguing with him when his plans are always best for me? Why would I argue with what's best for me? Isn't it funny how some of the things we have prayed for in the past we now complain about now? I can imagine, a young boy praying, Lord, when I get a wife, Lord, you just bless me with a wife that would be beautiful, smart, and funny. That's all I ask for, God. When you give me a wife, let her be beautiful, smart, and funny. That's all I want. And later on, this little boy gets married. He marries a beautiful, smart, and funny lady. And then later on in their marriage, he's complaining because she takes too long to get ready in the morning. Because she's making herself beautiful for her husband. So the thing he prayed for is now an inconvenience to him. And then smart, because now he's complaining. He's like, God, why does my wife always correct me? You prayed for a smart wife. You're dumb. So you prayed for this. Why are you complaining about this? God, why does all my friends like my wife more than they like me? You prayed for a wife that's funny. She's funnier than you. Like the things you prayed for now you're upset with. Be careful what you asked for. God may actually give it to you. I know those things are kind of funny, but in reality is maybe for some of us, we prayed that God would allow us to be promoted. I just want to provide more for my family. I want to do more for my family. And we ask God to give us this promotion, give us this raise, and we do that. And then it comes at an expense of the fact that now we spend our time in the office praying that our wives and our children will just understand why we're not home right now. Because the thing we prayed for, now we're having to pray against. You prayed for this. You prayed for this promotion. You prayed for that extra $20,000. But it comes expensive not being with your family. Be careful what you ask for. But we say things like Psalms 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord, he'll give you the desires of your heart. And I don't know how many times I've heard Christians say, but God wants to give you the desires of your heart. Doesn't God want to give you the desires of your heart? I mean, God, don't you want to give me the desires of my heart? But we forget there's a conditional statement at the very beginning of this. Delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord. Parents, don't you love it when your kids come to you with something they want to do, something that you've already instructed them to do? If your kid comes to you and say, hey, we're not going anywhere today, right? Nope, we're staying home all day. We're not going anywhere, not running errands. You can just be bored in your room. We're staying home. Well, I was going to clean and organize my room. Are you okay with that? You know how what most parents, well, at least I would. I don't want to speak for most parents. I don't want to put you in trouble. I'd be like, do you want Dad to help? Because when the things that I've set forth that are right and good for my kids, and they come to me and say, hey, I want to do that, don't I want to join in on that? When they're like, you walk in the room and like, what are you doing? Why is your light still on? Oh, I got a test in a couple of days. I was just going to go ahead and start studying for it. I mean, I've said that like 100 times. I didn't know if you're ever really listening or not. But I mean, doesn't that, you delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart, because the more times you spend with God, the more you understand what he really wants for you, and you start to want the things he wants for you, and therefore the desires of your heart are really things that God has already desired for you in the first place. It's not about being selfish and God giving you what you want. Be careful what you ask for. Delight yourself in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. There's a condition to this promise. But let's not forget, sometimes we're so determined to dig our own grave that we shouldn't be surprised when God gives us a better shovel. Because he knows what he's good at. He's good at bringing dead things back to life. And sometimes things are just, we're so determined to live in sin, we're so determined to be rebellious, God may say, you know what, fine, dig your own grave because I'm good at bringing dead things back to life. I'll let you dig that grave because I'm the only one who will pull you out of it in the first place. Be careful what you ask for. In this sense, Israel was asking for a king. We want a man to lead us, not God. Be careful what you ask for. Second thing is this, God exalts the humble. In chapter 9, 18 through 21, so then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and he said, tell me, where in this house of the seer? Samuel answered, Saul, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place today. You shall eat with me. In the morning I will let you go. All that's on your mind. For the donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom are you as desirable in Israel? Is not you and all of your father's house? Saul answered, am I not a Benjaminite? For I'm the least of the tribes of Israel, and is not my clan the humblest of all the clans in the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way? Saul is completely confused. They're in the inferior of the inferior groups. Who's the greatest among you? Well, certainly none of us. We're the humblest of all the groups. We're the smallest of the groups. Surely God doesn't use any of that stuff. God exalts the humble. Genesis 49:27, when Jacob prophesied over all the children, all the 12 tribes, this is what he said about the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, at night and shall divide the spoil. What did God tell Samuel? He is going to be the one who defeats the Philistines. He will lead them in the defeat of the Philistines. And if you look the next chapter over to next Sunday, when we get here, the first thing we see Saul do is beating the Ammonites. He's using the least to do the great. God exalts the humble. One of my favorite verses, Matthew 23:12. Whoever exalts himself, God will humble. But whoever humbles himself, God will exalt them. You can, one or two ways. You can exalt yourself and tell everybody how great you are, how bad you are, how you're built different. You can tell God, everyone, all those things about who you are. And God will be like, and I will humble you. Or, I'm just lucky to be on the field. I'm just glad to be here today. Who can I love? Who can I serve? Everyone knew my battery went out but me. That's awkward. Did my battery go out? Yes. I'm like, I didn't even know that, and I'm wearing it. So anyways, but you can go over here and say, hey, who can I serve? Who can I minister to? I'm the least of these. God says, I'm going to exalt that person. So I was like, why would you even look my direction? I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, and my clan's even the smallest of that. Why would you even look this way? Because God exalts the humble. Saul didn't see himself as a mighty leader, and that's exactly the perfect thing God needed so he could make a great leader. Last thing is this. There will always be worthless fellows. There's always going to be worthless fellows. Chapter 10 and verse 27. But some of the worthless fellows said, how can this man save us? They despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. Now, I know when we read through this, we know what happens next. We know the full story of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. We know the Old Testament history, and it's hard for us to read that and be like, yeah, but Saul, he didn't turn out to be that great of a guy. But right now, what we do know is this, we were first hearers. We were experiencing this firsthand at the moment. What we know is that Samuel, the guy God had appointed to lead us, we prayed for a king. God said, give him a king. Samuel said, here's your king. And we're all excited Because God has orchestrated all these things, and Saul was not outside of God's will by being the king. God had ordained him to be the king. Samuel had anointed him to be the king. I get it. Some of us are still like, yeah, but he wasn't that great of a king. Because you're reading on like you know the whole Old Testament story. But for right here for Israel, God was at work and God was doing a great thing for them. But there were still naysayers in the crowd. Also, the text doesn't indicate this, but this wasn't because they were against Israel having a king. This wasn't because they were against like just the format. This was because they didn't like Saul. They said they despised him. They didn't say anything about, this is not best for Israel or this is not what God has set us up to be. It was like these worthless men despised him and then brought him nothing to honor him. They looked at his lack of experience, his skill set, mainly what he didn't have, and so therefore they didn't honor him. Church, in life, there's always going to be people who think. It's exactly what there's going to be always people who think. They think you should have done it. They think you shouldn't have done it. They think you should have kept quiet. They think you should have spoken louder. They think you should have done it sooner. They think you should have done it later. They think you should have done anything at all. People will always be thinking. But Saul wasn't out of God's will. God had orchestrated this whole thing. And the very thing that people wanted, God listened. God said, okay, then you can have this. But the scripture calls these men worthless. But notice how Saul responds. He held his peace. He didn't let the negative actions of worthless men take away from the direction God was leading him at that time. Church, we are people. And people are messy. But don't let people take away what God has given you, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. What you should do is hold your peace. So the next time you get that email, the next time that person sends you that message or they make that comment that really just felt out of line or just really fired you up, hold your peace. People are messy. And we don't always understand who's going through what and why they're going through it or what initiated the conversation. Hold your peace. There always be worthless fellows. There's always people who will be thinking. But maybe right now what they don't understand is that you're out looking for donkeys and they think you should be home tending the gardens. But you're set on a mission to go look for donkeys because over here God was orchestrating something else. And what you don't understand and what they don't understand is that God has worked this entire time, and so we just have to continue to take step by step and day by day. So, church, my encouragement to you today is understand that we need to be careful what we ask for. God just may give it to us. The other thing is God will exalt the humble. How we carry these things out, how we approach him, how we ask for things. Are we being humble or are we demanding because we're owed something? And there will always be worthless fellows. So hold your peace. It's always better to hold your peace. Let's close in a word of prayer today. God, thank you so much for today. A chance to be in your word and see how you are orchestrating things. God, the things that we sometimes think are good, God, you know are worthless. And sometimes the things we think are worthless, you call good. Which only proves one thing. We don't know what is right all the time. We don't know what is true all the time. But you do. So, Lord, I pray that you would make that clear to us. Give us a heart that will listen to you. A mind that will be focused to your word and the calling you've given us. As we leave this place, let our mind and our hearts be set on being a light and a city on a hill. God, we would know that when things don't make sense, when we're just out looking for donkeys, you are orchestrating something greater than we can see. Help us be mindful of that you are at work in our lives. Thank you for that, Jesus. Amen. Now, before we dismiss, at the end of the service, we're going to have some deacons down front and myself. Maybe you want to tell us about your donkey hunting story and how you went looking for donkeys, and maybe you're still looking and you're just asking God what and why, and you want to talk to someone about it. Can I just encourage you that we would love to talk with you and pray with you? Maybe something exciting has happened because of this, and you just can't wait to share it with someone. We would love to hear and listen and pray. Just a couple reminders. We have our upward ceremony at 3 today and Phil's retirement party at 5 o'clock. If you've not RSVP'd for that, you're still welcome to come. Just know that we didn't count on that for food. So you may have to promise your kids Sonic on the way home, because if we run out, it's because we were expecting these many people to come, but we don't want you to not come because you didn't RSVP. We want Phil and Karen to see the experience and feel the love that they had for 34 years of fellowship and service here. That being said, you're dismissed. Have a wonderful time. If we can pray for you, please let us know.